I'd like to talk a little bit about how age affects the work you do in an organization and how you're valued and how you value other people and what you can do about it. So what's age got to do with it? There are two things that go on in every organization, every occupation, and anywhere, any type of organization you have ever been in, private or public. And that's, there is an age distribution in the jobs that people hold. Each one has a different age distribution. And there are age norms that evolve around those jobs. And what happens is the norms evolve and they define who is ahead of schedule and who's on schedule and who's behind schedule. And we have some pretty strong notions about what each of those statements means. Someone who's ahead of schedule must be, they're young, they're vibrant, they have new ideas, they're valued by the company or the organization. And somebody who is behind schedule is somebody who probably didn't quite make the grade. And they're just probably sitting there, perhaps like deadwood in an organization. Well, typically we think about that sort of a problem, if you will, because it's a human resource problem, as being the result of age. And what can you do about an employee's age? You can't change it. It's there. But what if how old your employees are depends on your organization rather than the other way around? What happens is that, especially, and this is for the older employees, but it happens to younger employees as well. Older employees are, eventually everybody is behind schedule. No matter how good you are, you eventually get behind schedule. There are not enough jobs to keep going for any occupation or any career. And so what happens is that people who were seen in early years as being very smart and very capable and making a very important contribution to the organization get defined by the company as being not valuable because they're behind schedule, and that means they're not as valuable. There's some very specific examples of this that you can see. One is in the aerospace industry, where the defense spending over from 1970s, it sort of dipped in the 1970s. And between the change in the economy and the number of jobs and the change in the distribution of employees, the baby boom versus the groups that came afterwards, many of these companies have bimodal age distributions. Now, the result is you've got a whole bunch of people there up at the top, and meaning that they've been there a long time, they're very well known, they haven't, quote, made it because there's been a lot of competition for the jobs, and they have sort of plateaued, who are very capable people, who basically are seen as, well, if we have to hire somebody for the next promotion, we can't hire them, we have to hire somebody who's younger. But they're also facing the difficulty that they need these employees because the project life cycle is so long that if they lose these older individuals, there's nobody in the middle to take up the slack. So they're actually losing a tremendous amount of information and knowledge in the company that's necessary for the work that they do. And they're losing it because it never occurred to them that there are a lot of people there who are very valuable in different ways than they've been using them. So there are implications for every organization and every occupation. Here's a consultant was talking to me one time, and he was absolutely convinced that a merger he was working on failed because the executives from one firm were in their late 50s and early 60s. The executives in the other firm were in their early 40s. And guess what? The younger executives thought the older executives were just too old. They didn't know what they were talking about. And the older executives looked at the younger ones and said, God, they don't have any experience. We can't work with them. And eventually the merger failed because these two groups of people because of their preconceived notions about the value of the other group, made it impossible for them to work together. Other examples include things like venture capital, where in the US, before in the dot-coms, it was impossible to get venture capital if you were over 30. You had to be under 30 or else you wouldn't understand the technology well enough. There were all the bright, shining, new, young people. In Britain, at the same time, you couldn't get venture capital if you were under 30. And the reason was because they saw these young, technologically savvy people as having great technical expertise, but absolutely too young to have the sufficient experience to run a company. One of the things companies need to do to manage this is to make sure that they don't have career timetables, if you will, in place that define people as ahead of schedule and behind schedule in ways that sort of devalue a wrong group of too many people. What Deloitte's doing, Deloitte & Touche right now is doing, is essentially they're creating contracts with the employees saying that, well, for the next 2 years, I want to be on a fast track. And therefore, the company expects them to work 90 hours a week, 100 hours a week. They'll have to be traveling and doing all the rest of the things that fast track people do. But the other alternatives are to have say a 3-year timetable or a 5-year timetable and say, you know, I have to basically work part-time during the next 5 years because perhaps it's a woman who's having children, or a man who wants to spend more time with his kids, or an elderly parent who requires care. And so the contract with the company is for a variable career, if you will. And it allows these people to be valued by the company even though normally they would be seen as behind schedule. So I think that's a terrific example of kinds of things that companies can do to make it visible that they value different timetables for careers in their organizations.